You're listening to Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Rock Talk.
We are speaking with Megadeth bassist David Ellefson. David, always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yes, Mitch. Great to chat again, man.
And in fact, the last time that we had a chance to talk here was at Place Belle in Laval, Quebec, when you opened up for the Scorpions. And wow, what a night, what an evening, what a pairing,
Yeah.
So let's we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the rise of LA thrash metal, this new DVD that you are a part of, you have what am I going to say? Narrated it is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
Talk to me about that project and being involved in it, and of course, just the rise of LA thrash metal.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Bob Nobandian, the creator, founder, sort of one of the chief architects of the film, he's done a few of them around kind of these different periods of the history of LA, hard rock and all this kind of stuff. So this one just certainly, caught my attention because of the thrash thing. And he asked me to narrate it. I've narrated a few films before, some independent films. And I've, so for me, it was a cool thing. They had shot everything. They sent me the script, and you go in the studio and you read it. And so it was funny. At times it was funny to talk about, and then Megadeth, when I'm in Megadeth, but I had to kind of remove myself from that a little bit and, put on my best Morgan Freeman voice, and just narrate. But
I'm going to be checking the inflection every time Megadeth comes. It's going to be blah, 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 and Megadeth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and Megadeth, yeah. So, but Bob, it's funny, Bob, when I met Dave in 1983, I moved from Minnesota to L.A., as most know the story. There was a handful of guys, and Bob Nobandian was one of them in the Southern California area, who had fanzines. They were very much... it's funny, like Bob does not look like a metalhead at all. He's like this kind of like college student looking guy, but he's really into metal. He really got the history of everything that was happening. I think he had his fanzine up in San Francisco. They had their fanzines. And these guys were really, they were in that day of like today's, Metal Injection, Loudwire, you know what I mean? They were that day's version of what we have today on the internet, real kind of fan-driven stuff, really following what really happened. So when Bob started doing these films, there's, as I understand, like two parts to this thing. It's so long, and there's so many people interviewed in it. Lars, of course, is a big part of it. I've got a pretty significant participation just on the being interviewed side, telling kind of I was there, hey, David, tell us about it kind of thing. So, fun trip down memory lane. I'm kind of the guy who's, sort of been the ambassador in Megadeth of a lot of that stuff. It's great to see a lot of my friends in there, guys like Juan, who now plays in Body Count, at the time played in Abattoir, who we took up to the Bay Area on the Megadeth debut shows, to see Gene Hoglan has some really great, comments and quotes in there and stuff. And it's pretty interesting because the film does a really great job of laying out, LA and three of the big four, Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth, originally hailed from LA. We kind of distanced ourselves a little bit in Megadeth as being known as sort of an LA band because there was this stigma that it was this Sunset Strip, glam, hair metal kind of community. But, Dave certainly had his experiences, when they were, with Metallica. I mean, it was.
Were you ever tempted to be part of that scene, though? Were you ever, when you saw Rat and Dokken and Poison and all these bands have this meteoric rise, did you think a little bit of lipstick wouldn't hurt, or did you always say no? We're not.
No. It's funny because right before I moved from Minnesota out to L.A., there were some bands coming up in the Minneapolis, hard rock scene that were kind of doing that thing a little bit. Probably more of a certainly nothing to the degree of Motley Crue. I remember seeing Motley Crue in Hustler magazine and going, wow, this is a band really on the edge. Talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it looked very believable. You could tell it wasn't, well, we can get them in Hustler, we can sell some more records. You could tell this is very much a part of the fabric of who this band is. And of course, my desire to move to LA happened kind of in the early 80s, 80, 81, as I saw Van Halen taking off. And now by this time, Ozzy was, tapping Randy Rhoads and Rudy Sarzo. We started to, who came from Quiet Riot, started hearing about Rat. Of course, Motley was getting on the radar. So by the time I got there in 1983, the Big Us Festival had already happened. I meet Dave, of course, as my upstairs neighbor within the first week of living there. And he was very much from the fabric of the kind of music I wanted to be involved in, that I was involved in, he had Diamond Head picture discs. He knew the back history of Motorhead. He'd played shows with various bands, being in Metallica. And, so it's funny, by the time I got there, Motley Crue, Rat, all these bands had already been signed and were already kind of firing off the runway. I remember going to the Troubadour down on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I remember Wasp had just played their final show as they were getting signed to Capitol. So they were kind of one of the, the last major label bands of that genre to get signed and move on. Next up was really probably Armored Saint, and they were not a hair metal band, not a thrash metal band, maybe kind of more of a, power metal band, if there's such a description like that for them. And on the radio, KMET, and which is now no longer a metal station, but KLOS, which kind of still is. They were playing things like Warrior. I remember hearing Queen of the Reich by Queensryche, this band way up in Seattle, kind of thing. So, there was, the hair metal thing was very much alive and happening. But, getting teamed up with Dave was really a godsend, because I knew right away. It's like, okay, Dave's the real deal, man. I mean, this guy is, he's a real writer. He's got rock star charisma. I mean, this guy's, he's not one of the wannabes out on the strip trying to be signed. He's the real deal. In fact, he was very much against being on the strip, and we didn't, it took me years to go to the Whiskey finally, and I didn't go to the Roxy. I mean, I think probably the Troubadour was kind of the one venue. It was where I first met Lars and James, came to a show there, and it was kind of this weird meeting of James and Lars, and I'm with Dave, and, this kind of meeting of, Metallica meets Megadeth for the first time kind of thing, But, it was kind of this hang. Great White, of course, was kind of hanging around. So there was a lot of, the people that were on the scene, in the scene part of it, but everybody was getting signed and, going on to what would become kind of their big MTV stardom.
Yeah. And of course, it's funny that you mentioned that when you've got that big four, not poster, but what is it? Gold discs or whatever?
Well, there's some gold, there's some platinum, fortunately double platinum
wow.
discs back there. One is from, I think, Australia, and the other one, I can't crane my neck that far to see, but it's, they were from wherever. I think, I don't know, U.S., I think. One is that we got at the awarded at the Indio Big Four show that we did, with on the Coachella site there. And then the other one, I think, came from Australia. So, it's funny how, you see that behind me all these years later. We joined forces, and as big as we all became, it just even went to another level, greater than the sum of its parts, if you will.
Yeah, and the Big Four, for what it was, we didn't get to see it in Montreal, but at some point before it's all said and done, it's got to happen again. That's just a wish. Got to happen.
Got to happen. I think it's a wish for all of us, and it's just it's like die and go to Headbanger Heaven. I mean, I think once you've seen it, and I think, look, speaking to the film, you really get the sense watching this film, and that's why I encourage all of your viewers to watch it, because as much as the four of us became, the probably the bigger and more famous of the batch, there was, you really got to see, I remember when Gene Hoglan was in Dark Angel, and I remember Jim came to audition for Megadeth at one point, and Kerry King ended up being the guitar player filling in for us on the first few shows, and we, borrowed Jim's Marshalls. I mean, we were all kind of friends in the neighborhood. And everybody loved Dave, even, I remember Vince Neil would see Dave and it was always hugs and high fives, and Stephen Pearcy. And so even people of different genres, I mean, they all kind of grew up together in LA. And now I didn't get to experience that because I moved there, as everybody had, moved on in their careers. But you could tell, Dave was very much well liked, very well respected in that scene, and I picked up on that right away. Like, okay, what we're doing is very different from this, very unique, very original. Probably not going to be an overnight success doing what we did in Megadeth, but I signed on and said, I'm in. Let's build this thing. Let's start it, build it, and do it, because I could see there were a whole bunch of other people around. Slayer, Megadeth. Dark Angel. Of course, there was Savage Grace, Omen, Hyrax, Abattoir was a band that was kind of close to us because we had a manager, Jay Jones, who was managing them, taking them in the studio. So there was this whole scene growing up around us, and then meanwhile, of course, up in San Francisco, Metallica, who weren't from there, they were from LA, but they moved up there and really got their traction up there, and Testament, Exodus, of course, and Death Angel. It's funny. I remember when Death Angel, I think one of their first shows they played with us at the Stone in San Francisco, and I remember me and Gar going out to watch them because I think their drummer was like 12. and it's so just funny watching, that. So we, it's kind of cool. At Megadeth, we got to see the LA scene grow up. We got to see the San Francisco scene grow up. Then as Megadeth and Slayer would go out to New York and play like L'Amour's and the Ritz, City Gardens in Trenton, we got to see what was bubbling out there, which of course Anthrax were the big heroes from there, and Overkill was coming up the ranks, and kind of got to see a whole other side of things out there as well.
Now, the movie is about the rise of LA thrash, but also one of the sort of record labels that was very much part of the scene back then was Combat Records. And
right.
You have now gone out and explain to me what you purchased. You didn't just purchase Combat, right? You bought the rights, you bought the catalog. What exactly?
Yeah.
Okay.
The trademark and brand became available, which I secured, and my partner Tom, who's a total metalhead, really knows the history of all this stuff. And one night he calls me up. He goes, "Dude, I think we can secure Combat Records." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And again, and I've told this before. I said, my experiences on Combat were not that favorable. So to me, it was almost like,
like
screw
revenge.
that. I don't even want it. You know what I mean? Screw those guys. And then I had to realize, look, that thing had long been sold off. The original owner, Barry Coburn, who we dealt with, sold that off. My royalty checks for Killing Is My Business come from Sony, you know what I mean? So that catalog got sold off many years ago. As I understand, Koch, which became E1, then had it. They put out some records, a few records in the 2000s, not thrash records. So Combat kind of went through this, this really kind of treacherous time, because, again, music was changing. Thrash metal wasn't that popular. And so, when we relaunched it, we said, this is going to be a full-blown heavy metal brand on all fronts, the merchandising, the bands, just everything we do. And again, it was, the original Combat, of course, was thrash, punk, Circle Jerks, Megadeth,
Well, they had
Raven,
Abattoir.
At Abattoir, Merciful Fate, you know what I mean? So it's like
and
all
a
kinds
great
of
Canadian band called Sword with Metalized.
Sword. And which, by the way, I must thank you for. People will soon find out. There's been an introduction to us about Sword, which we will talk about later. But one of my favorite bands.
And Metalized, great album, by the way.
Metal. We used to drive around in the Peace Cells tour listening to Metalized all the time. Stoned Again, which kind of became the theme song. So I mean, all these great artists. So when we relaunched it, we said, look, we want to. And part of the reason we took our time to relaunch it is, number one, we wanted it to really be, to be this heavy metal brand and label. And so we relaunched it with, New Raven, some new Hellstar stuff. We, Mark Rizzo from Soulfly, we just signed him to that. So that, stuff that's really believable combat material, and that's part of what we did with the EMP Label Group is we wanted it to be a label group. So we've got Outlaw Records, which we just put out we're releasing Ron Keel's record on, which kind of has this sort of southern rock, almost country, cool thing about it. EMP is sort of our general mainstream. EMP Underground is where we put more of the death metal stuff, and then Combat for our thrash stuff.
Yeah, and by the way, as far as the Ron Keel goes, I just want to quickly point out that a couple of years ago he did this tribute for my wife's father who passed away from cancer. He did Rock and Roll Hell for this Kiss tribute, and we gave all the money to a palliative care home, and you're now using that as a bonus track on his album. So I just wanted to thank Ron for having been involved in that, because his heart has always been in the right place.
Ron is a wonderful, wonderful human being.
Yeah.
Phoenix native, as I've learned, and then when I knew of him in L.A., and then he went to Nashville, and then I got reacquainted with him again, and now up in Sioux Falls, which is not far from my little hometown of Jackson, Minnesota. And yeah, just a wonderful thread of Ron. Ron's a survivor, man. He's an incredible talent, great singer. He's got a great band around him, and definitely a
great person. That above everything else.
Yeah, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, let me get back to Combat. How aggressively are you going to market it? Do you go back to the days of Abattoir and those things and try to start getting re-releases and reissues, or is it just really about having the name and moving forward? Sort of, where do you see it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think always things move forward. Lots of times, like with Hellstar, there's some stuff we were able to secure that hadn't been released yet that we have access to. Just like Killing Is My Business, that those rights are, held by, by a sale from, Combat to Sony many years ago. So a lot of those records won't be available, for us to have. And that's why we called it a relaunch, because we're essentially moving it forward now. But, I think, we kind of know. It's kind of one of those labels that we just intuitively kind of know what works with it. And it's funny, the day we pushed the press release out a few weeks back, that announcing that we were relaunching the label, man, the people that came out and go, oh man, it's, I got turned on to music by the bands on that label, and I still have my Combat t-shirt, and you know what I mean? And it was just really amazing the impact that label had over the years with its catalog. And again, I didn't think too much about it, because for us, it was a very odd experience, and we couldn't wait to get on the Capitol and get moving forward, So, but so I'm happy to, have it be held in such high regard by the fans.
Yeah, and what I found remarkable about the press release is that right away, Billboard, Rolling Stone, and all these sort of outlets that don't necessarily cover metal were like, oh my God, this is cool. And it's like, oh,
yeah,
okay. So, I mean, I get when Blabbermouth says it's cool, and I get when Brave Words says it's cool, but when you start seeing those people saying this is cool, you go, oh, it really had sort of this generational impact.
I was walking into a movie with my wife, and when I saw the Grammys tweeted it, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool,
Yeah, right.
And it was, that was pretty cool. And again, I have my hats off to Tom Hazard. I mean, he really has a great instinct on this stuff, and just kind of knowing. What, and that's huge. Just having it. I've got my own instincts on certain things, and it's that's why I always like that's why I like being in a band. It's partnership. You know what I mean? And not everybody's great at every one thing, but between the team, you're again greater than the sum of its parts. So that was, my hats off to him for seeing that opportunity and really urging me to grab that.
Yeah. Now, I do know you have to step out at some point, so let me just start wrapping up here quickly. EMP signed the Killer Dwarfs out of Canada, Canucks.
Right. Yeah.
5-label deal. Great stuff. In fact, the live album was recorded at the Brass Monkey in Ottawa. I was there that night. Talk to me about the band and what you saw in them that said, hey, these guys are worth having on our label.
Well, there again, Tom started talking to me about them a few months ago, and we were talking about where that fits in EMP, Combat, et cetera. And one of these bands that had, I just remember when they were out, years back, and they were just kind of one of these cool bands that people like. I mean, the name is kind of funny. they've got a great sense of humor about them. Again, being Canadian, they have a Canadian sense of humor. I think, it's one of these bands that, again, like I think probably Hellstar, Raven, a lot of these artists that come back, we're at this weird point in time where we always need new young music, of course. And then there's some of the blue chip icons, even Megadeth, Iron Maiden, Metallica, bands that have really, kind of stayed the course. And then there's a lot of these groups coming back out with new material, re-release of things. We experienced it with Autograph when we signed them. That there's just this incredible fan base that is so excited to have them back out and be active again. And, look, I think with everything we do with EMP, as long as a band is able to work, they're able to tour, they're able to, play well, sound good, look decent. And I think sometimes for a lot of artists, Anvil, that Anvil movie, that told a story, that what a harrowing tale, and you just champion guys like that to get back on it, and rise up again. And so when bands come around and they're able to, really, really be viable and bring something new and cool and good to the table, I think that for us, Killer Dwarfs fell in that, it's like, here's a band that people are excited to see. And again, just as fans and, our internal dialogue at the label is like, dude, this is really cool, man, to be able to champion this and to continue to give these bands, a home where they can continue to push out music, and hopefully that helps their touring and their merchandising and all the other things that it takes to, for them to be able to try to make a living as an artist.
To succeed. And I know that about 4 or 5 years ago, they had started work on a Killer Dwarfs documentary, and then it got pushed aside for various reasons, but maybe we should get that back up and running.
Yeah.
Ellefson Coffee Co. and other beverages, I guess. What is sort of the future of that? And do you see yourself expanding into other products, not just coffee? Do we see a wine, a beer, salsa?
Well, it's funny you say that. So here I am. I'm the sober guy, right? So I quit drinking before we recorded. Right. Rest in Peace. So 1990. And I did it just for my own, preservation. Quite honestly, I needed to do it in order to just, live and be productive. But I realized that, having a brand like, Ellefson Coffee and, some of the even Combat, some of these other, brands that we have, look, Headbangers, they drink wine, they drink beer, they do things, they do that. And, one of the, I alluded to it last week on a FaceTime or a Facebook Live thing. Hydra Beer is a company over in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They came to our events back in Jackson, Minnesota in November, and they asked if they wanted to do a coffee stout, and they asked us if they could buy Ellefson coffee to put in it, and we had some internal dialogue about it because I said, look, it can't be billed as something that has my family name on it. We're a non-drinking household, and it would be kind of hypocritical for me to have my name on it and then go down that route. But so we talked about it, and he said, well, look, it's basically an ingredient of a beer, in the coffee stout thing. So we decided to give it a try, and so Hydra Beer out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, is going to be doing their coffee stout with the Urban Legend in it, and and like I said, look, that's one product I won't be drinking because for that reason, I don't even drink non-alcoholic wines or any of that stuff. I just don't even go there, but. Look, I know our fans like that stuff. And even with Combat, we've been approached about a few different beverages on the side with that. And again, that's a heavy metal brand. And so, again, these opportunities are coming our way, and we're kind of just taking them as they come. And I think for us, it's, I think a couple things, for Ellefson Coffee is just that. It's coffee. With Combat and those other things that come around, it's a heavy metal brand. It's a heavy metal lifestyle, and that's very much what we set out with the intention of that when we started it.
And I don't see that as being hypocritical. I mean, you have a fan base that has a certain want and desire, and And so you provide it, and that's just part of it. And of course, at the same time, when you're doing interviews, you can still talk about being sober. You can still talk about being drink responsibly, and you're just delivering product that is, fits the niche. So it's
Yeah,
fun.
it's kind of interesting being in the sort of food and beverage business, and sort of just kind of a weird moment that happened, in my life that would happen, and I've learned a lot about it, and I've learned a lot about. We're doing some things. We're exhibiting at NAMM coming up, and there's going to be we have a company we're working with who actually has kegs of coffee. You know what I mean? So we can go head to head. You can have your Molson here and your Ellefson coffee here. You know what I mean? So, I think the more it all kind of fits together as part of the lifestyle. Because again, I'm not a prude. I'm not on a pulpit of morality about any of it. Hey, live your life, do what you do. And that's kind of my attitude with it. I really, that's we all choose our path, and so to be able to bring lifestyle and things like that into what we do, I think the fans they like it. It's a fun thing. Look, lots of times it's a piece of memorabilia as much as anything. Even when people buy coffee, sometimes they'll buy a bag of coffee, take it home, and put it next to their Megadeth beer and their Iron Maiden Trooper beer. It's just a piece of memorabilia. So whatever, it's fine too.
I'm still waiting on my Ellefson coffee, by the way. Yeah, no hints there.
We will get that to you. We will get that to you.
And let's just quickly wrap this up. Just a quick Megadeth update and stuff. First of all, how was that tour for you with the Scorpions? Because for me, at that show. Holy Christ. I'm sorry for the language. Holy moly. Let me put it that way. Wow. What an evening of power and of glory. And wow, it was just great.
Wasn't it cool? It really was cool. It's funny because when we got the call about it, we had just finished playing on Seth Meyers in December a year ago. I got back to the hotel, and Danny Zalisco, the promoter here in Phoenix, he hit me up. He said, "Hey, got an idea, run by you, give me a call." So he gave me a call, and I said, "Listen, I was just with the agent. What do you think about Megadeth and Scorpions in the fall?" I said, "Wow." I said, "We're planning this tour with Meshuggah. I don't know when it's coming, but I said, yeah, by all means, please hit up the powers that be." And I said, me, Dave, Kiko, we're huge Scorpions fans over the years. Me and Dave have done Megadeth shows with the Scorpions over the years, gotten to know the guys, and what a good mix of music. We're both, we both have our harder years of yesteryear. We both had our melodic years. Of course, the Scorpions have, ballads and all this stuff. So it really was a good fit. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it encouraged us to dig a little deeper in and pull out some things like Take No Prisoners and some more thrashing heavy stuff, which I think is probably going to continue as we head now into 2018. We've got a nice summer lined out of European festivals, and I think in a lot of ways it opened that up into some deeper cuts into the catalog.
Yeah, it really did. And Dystopia, the last album, if you finished your career with that album, it would be the absolute crowning achievement. But I know that you can't just sit around and not make new music. So what are you sort of looking forward in terms of the next new Megadeth? Is that 2 years down the road, 6 months down the road? How do you sort of see that?
Well, we've talked about that, and it's funny because I think for us, the 90s were not very nice to thrash metal. I mean, it started in the early 90s with obviously the Seattle movement, and then this new metal movement and radio rock, and all these different things happened. And and fortunately, most of us, or a few of us, have survived it. And the 2000s were kind of a recorrecting and rebuilding. I know when I came back in 2010 and we did, the Rest in Peace 20th anniversary, it was very clear. This is what the fans want to hear, and it took us a couple of records and again, a couple of lineups to really get things dialed into the point where we could, really get things recalibrated and really kind of set the baseline again of what Megadeth really is. And I think we accomplished that on Dystopia. And, moving forward, there's, look, if it's nice to know that was a record that really kind of reset the benchmark for what Megadeth is. And I think one of the reasons that record worked is we intentionally, again, we kind of rebuilt the lineup, we rebuilt management, we kind of rebuilt the whole structure of Megadeth to a large degree. But we didn't have any tour dates. We took as much time as we needed. And now, of course, the train is in motion and the phone rings and they're like, hey, can you, do a summer of festivals? Hey, can you come to Mexico and do this? So now I don't think we quite have the, it's kind of a luxury problem. The phone's ringing. People want us to come and play. So now I think the trick is making a great record, a follow-up to Dystopia, that we do make sure we take the time and make it right. I think gone are the days of like, in order to get a tour, you got to go put out a new album. I think those days are gone for, maybe young new bands. It's still like that. But, for the most part, I think now people just enjoy live music. They love these festivals. And new album or not, they want to see you play. They want to see you up on that stage playing their favorite songs for them. So I think that, by and large, that's kind of the calling of the music business right now.
Yeah, and it's a good calling. And, of course, Kiko, what an addition to the band. And that's no disrespect to anybody that was before him, but what an addition to the band. I mean, just perfect. Dave, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
And we will do this again soon.
Cool. Cheers.
Cheers. All right.
This is Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Mitch Lafon.